fewer and fewer people trust long-time existing sources of media. That would be the biggest challenge. We're out there looking for the truth, but we're having a harder and harder time convincing people that what we're reporting is the truth.
Oftentimes, I am the only reporter people will ever speak to in their life.
And we now are in an environment where the fragmentation has led to this lack of trust. There is no hero coming to rescue us.
Thank you all, first of all, for coming. There is food back here in the back. So please get food. There's iced tea. I'm big iced tea. But tea has to have ice. So there is a big old cooler of ice back there, because God didn't make tea without ice. You got to have them together.
And just at a faith-based conference.
I did, and I was at a.
And
so
God
I'm feeling.
said that.
God did. God came down from the heavens with the commandment.
Must have ice.
The second commandment is,
Yes.
"Thou shalt not have tea without ice."
I missed the ice, and I was feeling it.
Be careful, Debbie. Be careful.
You want me to get you some?
Sophia, can you hold up in a second? Annie brought. I'm gonna introduce the panel, and then I want to talk just a little bit about our day today, and some of the activities that we've got planned. This is kicking off and a continuation of the conversation we're having at the Kozmetsky Center on the Constitution and the First Amendment. And those are two things that when you say those two things in general, people usually start falling asleep. When you say Constitution, it's like kind of boring. Then First Amendment, like, not boring. I think everybody here knows right now we're at a very critical point in America where those are at the height of conversations among all of us. And so I'm very excited to focus today on the First Amendment and on one of the principles of the First Amendment and the right of the First Amendment, which is the right to a free press. And we've got three very high-level practitioners and also some alumni of St. Ed's that are working in the media and in the press and in journalism, and in this world we live in, the context that we're living in. So I'm going to introduce the panel, and then I'm going to ask them a couple of questions. And then I want y'all to be asking questions as well. So let me start on the far end. Debbie Hiott is here. She is the general manager of KUT, which I think is super cool. And I was saying I'm a contributor.
It's a fun
I'm
gig.
a contributor, but not a big one. Just a little contributor.
Whatever
I get the
you can
pin
do.
or
It's
whatever.
everybody-
Yeah,
But-
it is
Whatever you
whatever
can do.
someone can do.
Yeah. And how many of you know what KUT is? KUT. What is KUT?
Public supported radio.
Yep.
NPR, the NPR affiliate.
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
And we'll have some conversation about the challenges that you've faced in the last just year on funding and how.
Been a few.
Just a little bit.
Oh my God.
So very happy to have Debbie here today. Annie Bresee,
Bresee, yeah.
is that right?
Close enough. Bresee.
Bresee. Annie is alumni of St. Ed's. What year did you graduate?
Oh, 2022.
Wow, so just like recent.
Doesn't feel like
Feels like yesterday. Oh, really? 2022 feels like a month ago to me. And is a reporter for the Fredericksburg Standard. Outside, how many of you know where Fredericksburg's at? Just west of here. Very, very popular place for all kinds of things. Wineries, winter, snowbirds, I guess, would be another thing. But Fredericksburg has its own. Right. Fredericksburg has its own newspaper in a rural area of Texas, which is becoming less frequent. And I wanted Annie brought, I love that you brought these. Do y'all mind holding those up? We've got paper. Okay, great. We have the Fredericksburg Standard. Thanks for bringing those.
Yeah, of course. My editor wanted me to bring a whole truckload, and so I talked her down. So there's a few over there.
So she brought papers, so please grab a copy of the paper from the Standard. I'm going to ask you a question or two about a specific story.
All right.
And then immediately to my left, everyone I think knows, but Professor Jenna Heath. Professor Heath has worked in all kinds of areas in journalism in Texas and nationally. We're very, very lucky to have her on faculty here, leading our journalism and digital storytelling program here at St. Ed's. So, the conversation I guess I want to start off with is on what is the one biggest challenge that you see facing your media outlets in the current climate?
Trust in media. That would be the biggest challenge. And it is the fact that, fewer and fewer people trust long-time existing sources of media. Some of that has been self-inflicted wounds from the media. Some of that is external, enemy of the people kind of things that sort of led to that. And what it means is that we're having a harder time. We're out there looking for the truth and trying to make sure we're reporting the truth, but we're having a harder and harder time convincing people that what we're reporting is the truth. It was probably, I don't know, by 2017 was when the first, fake news kind of started. And then within a year of that, I was hearing that was being used against reporters in our newsrooms locally. And so what it does is it undermines your ability to reach certain sources because they have, made a decision that, well, you're not going to be honest about what I'm saying, so I'm not going to talk to you anyway. Or they're going straight, to social media and telling their version of the story. And it also undermines, your ability to reach the readers because they're not sure. They're, inundated, bombarded with stories, and some of them have very strict journalistic standards and some of them don't. And so they just don't know what to trust anymore. And that affects, it affects how they engage with you as a reporter. It affects how they engage with, media organizations. And it also affects how they engage civically with their community because they're not always getting good information.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think trust in news is, I've only ever been in this industry with fake news as a contender.
Yeah.
But I think especially where I work, which is a very rural community, a very conservative community, very religious community, that it's oftentimes I am the only reporter people will ever speak to in their life. And they have an idea of what journalism is, and it might not be the interpretation I have. And so it's difficult getting people to talk with you, especially about important issues that they don't want to seem political. So for example, I really have been trying to do a story about how immigration is affecting fruit harvest in our county, which it is. We know it is. But it's really hard getting someone to talk about that issue because they don't want their neighbor or someone at church coming up to them saying, why are you talking to that reporter about that? I thought you voted how you voted and things like that. So I think I think going back to what you said, it's difficult to get people to trust your intentions are good.
That's interesting. I want to follow that up, but I'm going to let Jenna go because I'm really curious about that. Go ahead, Jenna.
I think I can talk about this now from a teaching perspective and also with some time since I was in the newsroom full time. I came to the university in 2008, right from the newsroom. And what I see that's really developed is related to what you're both saying, and that is the fragmentation of information. So one of the things that I do in journalism classes early on is I ask my students not to be getting their news from their social media feeds for a while. I have them download the app from the news source. What I tend to use the New York Times. Does it have its flaws? Yes, it does. Is everything in life has its flaws? Yes, but it's still really kind of the national paper of record. And the New York Times does really amazing work across all kinds of forms of storytelling. So writing, video, animation. The New York Times uses beautiful animations on its opinion sections. It has something called OpDoc, which are short documentaries. And one of the things I'm trying to introduce students to is what an actual news source is. And this has changed in my 17 years on the faculty. I used to say to my intro class, how many of you grew up with a news source, either a newspaper or a station that your parents watched on TV? And most of the class would raise their hand back in 2008. And over the years, that number has dwindled to really, like, I've had classes in the last handful of years where no one grew up in a family where there was a consistent delivery of news from a news source. And so I think part of the trust issue is the fragmentation, is really understanding that when you are getting all your information from your social media feed, first of all, we all know about this, you're getting an algorithmic delivery of what you agree with, most likely. Unless you're a very extraordinary human and you say, I'm going to go out of my way to listen and read and engage with stuff I completely disagree with, that may even offend me, which almost no one does. Mm-hmm. You are getting in this kind of circle of a world that you feel comfortable with and that you agree with. And what that has led to is polarization. I think it is the great under-discussed fact of the political moment that we are now in. And the problem with this, too, is that the last thing I'll say is that, you know, I came of age as a young kid in the 60s and the 70s. And my parents were very politically active. And they were very active around the Vietnam War. They were anti-war protesters. They did civil rights work. And there was division in this country about the war. You know, sometimes you look at old movies and it looks like everybody was a hippie dancing around in Central Park and everyone was opposing the war. That wasn't the case. There was real division. There was civil unrest and protest. But there was not a discussion that the war wasn't a fact. The war was a fact about which people disagreed. And we now are in an environment where the fragmentation has led to this lack of trust, a total incomprehension and lack of understanding about what journalism is and what journalists do. And the use of that lack of understanding by politicians for their own purposes. And this is why it's so very important to engage with the news source. And that is something that I didn't have to require in the beginning, but over time. And I've had students say to me, I remember one of the best emails I got from a student who graduated a few years ago was, Jenna, you made me subscribe to the New York Times, the digital version. I don't make anyone get the print version, even though I love print. You can get it if you want. And he said, and I was so mad when you did that. And by the way, the subscription for the whole semester is like $15. So it's much cheaper than anything you're getting in the bookstore, okay? And it delivers a lot. And he said, but I kept my subscription. This was like 4 years after he graduated. And I'm so glad you made me do that. And I still remember this email, you know, because I think if you convert one, you know, you can convert many. You go out. So I think that, to me, that's the fragmentation and the lack of trust. Yeah.
I want to follow up on that, on how fragmented and the loss of a singular point of reference among that fragmentation. And I'll give a specific example. The January 6th attack on the Capitol. So on January 6th, we all saw it unfold. We saw a mob throw bottles, kill people, have a lynching, noose out in the out on the Capitol lawn. We saw Mike Pence being escorted out of the Capitol. For several hours, the American government was essentially, a coup was successful for several hours that day. It stopped the process of the American election.
Yes.
And so that day we saw everyone had a common reference point at that day. But since then, over the last, 5 years, we've seen a fragmentation of how we are now looking at that day, and I'm curious on that, about how your thoughts as a journalist. How do we resolve what is an obvious point on January 6th to now that's your interpretation of what that looks like? However you want to start.
We're punting to you.
I know. Well, I work primarily in local and news, so I think oftentimes I don't have to reckon with that as much.
You kind of do, though, right? Because you've got like the farm workers, the migrant workers.
When it comes to like national, stories distilled locally, for sure. I think what I've seen is, and something I think media can do better at, is making clear distinctions between what's opinion and what's news. I think we've really gotten away from that.
Yep.
And I'm print. I don't want to blame TV news, but I think TV news is a part of it. That pundits sitting at a desk talking about why the news is good or bad is not news. It's pundits, and that has a place. That's why we have an opinion page in newspapers. But I think we've done a bad job of distinguishing that from the actual newscast or the actual news page in recent years, to a point where I've seen it happen in our newsroom, where people conflate what editorials are versus what is the news we write. We just had a gentleman come in. He wrote a letter to the editor. This was actually after the Charlie Kirk stuff happened. And again, I live in a very conservative area. It's pretty agreed upon point of view. But this gentleman came in and he wrote something basically in support of Charlie Kirk. And he came in the next day and said, I don't want to run it. I don't want you to run it. I'm nervous that people will think differently of me. Now, I have my own opinions about the news, but I liked what my editor did, because the next day she wrote an editorial about why that's an issue, why it's an issue that people feel scared to write a letter to the editor. That's how you know that a system's broken. You shouldn't be scared to voice your opinion, even if it's an opinion that I might disagree with or somebody might disagree with. That's the whole reason we're here, is First Amendment, And so that's a long-winded way of saying, I think we, as media, but especially as educators, need to do a better job of teaching people what news is and what opinion is, because it's not enough that we know. It's not enough that journalists know what news is. Everybody needs to know what news is, and we need to do a better job of communicating that.
Yeah, media literacy is important, and part of that is it's not up to the educators, it's up to the media to explain itself more often. Here's why we did this story, the way we did this story, here's how we did this story. I think those are things that studies have shown. Actually, when you do some of that, you do increase trust in the actual reporting if you're explaining the why of it all. I think another thing that we can do as media is we have to go back to the facts over and over again to provide context, because I think we make an assumption often that people know the basic story. And so in talking about January 6th, people may have known the basic story, but, you know, you have to provide context about, you know, and these hearings and this evidence and these hearings that Republicans agreed that these were things that happened. And then the other thing that we have to do is we have to be better about policing ourselves and each other as an organization, as, you know, media. And you mentioned that a little bit earlier. I think that we have strayed a lot from the, you know, there are a lot of reporters who have become personalities that have become social media influencers. And part of doing that is presenting yourself instead of the story.
Yeah.
And what that leads to is it's inevitable that you start crossing that line into opinions. And it's really unfortunate because I think it casts doubt on everything that all of us are doing when more and more, you know, some very big names will be on social media saying very opinionated things. And you think, wow, you know, what does that mean about their reporting? I think with most of those journalists, it means that when it comes to their reporting, they're still going to chase the facts and they're still going to get the information and present the information, but they have opened up a perception of bias that, you know, is going to be there.
Yeah. I would say that there's no opt-out. There's no opt-out. That it's really crucial to understand that there is an entirely parallel media infrastructure in this country now that is, you have probably half the country who believes, because the news sources that they consult, and this is, since we're talking about January 6th, we're talking about on the right, so Fox, Truth Social, and other right-wing radio, by the way, which has really taken advantage of news deserts, place where there's no longer a really good local newspaper or news source. You have half the country, if the last election is an indication, who believed that January 6th was a important and powerful and genuine act against an undemocratic result. They believe that people who don't believe that are deluded. If you don't believe that, I don't believe that, I believe they're deluded. So we are in a situation now in this country where you have people in alternative realities who are totally wedded to their version of events. You may have people in your families, Thanksgiving's coming. I don't know what everybody's Thanksgivings are like, you know? Maybe you have like Uncle Joe showing up with his theories, and then Aunt Mary's got her, you know, and they're in a media infrastructure that is telling them that what happened on January 6th was heroic. Now, your question is, how do you resolve this? And I think the honest answer is nobody really knows. But I think what Debbie and Annie are saying, you have to start at home with yourself. There is no big hero coming to rescue us. We each have to decide to engage in the news. We have to decide that we're going to find news sources that are not trying to lecture us about how we should think about things, but are trying to tell us what is happening in a factual way so we can decide what we think about things. And I think that is an individual decision. So when people say to me, oh, I don't pay attention to the news, it's too depressing, I get very irritated. You know what's depressing? Seeing democracy die. Because people are not digging in their own lives listening to KUT. I listen on the way home. You know, I give $5 a month to PBS. I give, you know, you guys are undergrads and you're in a position now where, you know, you're probably rubbing two dimes together. I was too. But the day will come where you can think about, maybe I can do $10 a month for KUT. Maybe I can afford the subscription to the local paper. And what I'm telling you is that is how we get out of this. Each and every one of you. There is no Superman coming. And if we don't do that, we're just going to continue, I think, in this. And you have political people who want power, who are diving right into the middle of this and using it. Yeah. So, and what does this do also? It suppresses voter turnout. Yeah. People don't engage in the civic process of voting. They do not. We have an election today. You know, turnout was big in the. It's going well in early voting, right? A local election. You know, my husband came home. Hey, we're old. He had written like, hey, this is how I'm voting on all the amendments. You know, we talked about the amendments. We took our cheat sheet into the voting booth. This is what we each have to decide we're going to do. That is the way out of this. There is no other way out of this. It is hard. It takes more time. There's no like one news source that's going to tell you the one truth. You have to do it. And so
one thing we do know in terms of trust in media is that people do still have higher levels of trust in their local media. They trust what Annie is saying because they've seen Annie at the grocery store. Their cousin had to talk to Annie about a story about this car wreck. You know, that there's still a belief that there's a real human being who is making decisions and doing this work behind it. And I think that what's happened on the national level is that it's just one big caricature.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And the other thing I'll say about this is we have people like Debbie who are from here, who have made their careers in their communities. And that's so very important, who aren't, you know, just kind of moving from one place to the other to build the next job, you know, who've remained committed to their communities. I was here covering the 2000 presidential election on election night. The national press were down on Congress Avenue. The whole Congress Avenue was blocked off. I was the Washington reporter for the Austin American Statesman. Debbie and I were colleagues. And does anyone know what happened? What happened in the 2000 election? Yes.
Was a tie initially?
Right. Who were the candidates?
I think one of them was George W. Bush. And
Yep.
I'm trying to think. Al Gore.
Yeah.
Yes, very good.
That's good.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
You deserve a sandwich.
Awesome.
You deserve a sandwich.
I'm good.
So we're set up, you know, the National Press Corps comes in, gets off the bus, and they make this big press thing. They close off Congress Avenue. And I was working with my colleague, Ken Herman, and we're writing the story, you know, and I was writing and Ken was feeding me and we were figuring out. And literally, the lead kept changing. Does anyone know what a lead is? What's a lead? Tell me, I got Hilltop Views people here. What's the lead of a story? Come on.
LEDE.
It's like setting up, like it's the intro.
Right, it's the first paragraph. Exactly, thank you, right. And you deliver the news in the lead. What's the news everybody wants to know on election night?
Who won?
Who won? What didn't we know?
We won.
We didn't know who won. Every time I turned around, Ken was like, Bush, Gore, delete, you know. 3:00 in the morning.
It was awful.
We pack up our stuff, all of us, all the reporters from all over the country, the world are traveling in this, and we don't know who the president is. And I'll never forget the front page of the Statesman. The Statesman rocked with the headline,
History on hold.
History on hold.
History on hold.
For weeks, we did not know who the president was. Did the country collapse? Did people break out in civil conflict and attack one another? No. There was a process, a constitutional process that the country all went through together to resolve this. Whatever you think about the ending, does anyone know how the decision was made, who the president was? What body made the decision? Yes.
Wasn't it something to do with Florida?
Yeah.
The hanging chads in Florida, yes,
What-
that was where the vote was most contested. At the end of the day, the constitutional process, who or what determined, Kim?
The Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said Bush had won the election. What did Al Gore do? Al Gore, what did he do, the Democratic candidate? Yes?
He conceded.
He conceded. This is what we do in a democracy. We concede when we lose and we pass power to the winner. That is the difference between us and an undemocratic country. And here I am. You think to yourself, there'll never be another story like this. That's what I thought.
I know.
This is the story of my career. There's never going to be another one like this. And here we are at January 6th. And if you want to know what the ramifications are of opting out, that's what the ramifications are. It's the difference between what happened in 2000 and what happened on January 6th.
So let me give you an argument here
Sure,
on this.
go
So
for
I
it.
want to
We like a good
hear your
argument.
thoughts on how this could play out. So obviously 2000 was a different time. Media was at a different stage. We're
Yeah.
now in 2025. Are we at a point, this is First Amendment conversation about free speech and free press. Aren't we seeing, isn't this reflection of outlets and fragmentation just an example of how democracy should work? How a free press shouldn't be a singular or a source that my parents trusted or my grandparents trusted, but shouldn't I reach places that the media provides me with information that I say that's the source that I feel comfortable with? Breitbart, Fox, CNN, Fredericksburg Standard, whatever those are, shouldn't I, as a democratic citizen, be able to make up my own mind what information I choose to access? And isn't it a reflection of the democratizing of the free press? 2000, we didn't have
what you're
this
asking.
large, instead of, I would argue, not me personally, but I would argue, they could argue, it's not as much fragmentation as it is choices in a marketplace of ideas.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's why, I mean, when I say that some of the trust in media issues are self-inflicted, that is, I'll go back to that, because we gave people reason to believe that they had to choose a partisan route in their news. And I think a lot of that goes back to, when CNN went 24 hours a day, and as you pointed out, you had to fill 24 hours with the same stories. People are going to wander, and that's when opinions start getting in there. And I think that the creation of things like Breitbart and Huffington Post were reactions to not feeling like they were seeing people like them reflected in the stories that were being told.
Rush Limbaugh,
Yeah.
right? We have the
Yeah.
80s and into like late 90s and even 2000, like mid 2000s. You had Rush Limbaugh expressing views that, and you talked about Thanksgiving. This is my Uncle Olin. No shoes.
Everybody's got an
no
Uncle
shoes.
Olin.
Uncle Olin, no shoes. There you go.
And I will say, having worked in newsrooms, when there is a story about a tax hike or, well, let's take Prop Q as an example. The reporter's minds immediately wander to, well, a great way to show the human impact of this story is how this particular homeless program needs help. And the reporter's mind does not go immediately to a great way to illustrate what Prop Q means is these people over here who are spending this much in taxes are going to have to start spending that much in taxes because that's not as interesting to show the story.
Yeah.
And I think that, I also think that it is true that, you know, I mean, we don't ask reporters who they vote for or what their politics are, but if, you know, if they were pinned down on it, you'd probably find more liberal arts majors, you know, more people who tend toward progressive politics in newsrooms. And so somewhere along the way, there were times when we did not reflect a segment of the community that just didn't see their needs in the stories.
And I think going back to Rush Limbaugh, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking of Rush Limbaugh or like Jon Stewart. We didn't necessarily view their programs as news. It was entertainment. And it was political adjacent because they were talking about it, but we considered it it wasn't a news source. So I think the definition of news has gotten lost along the way. And I think now we consider the Rush Limbaughs and the Jon Stewarts of the world a news source.
Joe Rogan.
Oh,
or
my
even
God.
John Oliver. Like, I mean, it's like, oh yeah, I watch the news. I watch John Oliver. Like that. I love John Oliver. It's also not the news, you know.
I would also say to your marketplace of ideas that I think you cannot take out the role of technology in this because what's different now is technology. And there's a very good essay that I assign to my students from 2018 actually, but it's still very relevant, by a professor at Columbia called "Is the First Amendment Obsolete?" And it's an argument and a counter argument. And the argument that Tim Wu, the law professor, he's really asking a question: is the First Amendment obsolete? And he's asking it now in our era because when the First Amendment was promulgated, the assumption was that the publisher was the government, right? That the government would restrain publishers, that the power relied with the government to censor or restrain, you know, Peter Zenger and the small publishers out there, pamphleteers during the revolution. And that was true. Well, now what Wu writes about, what we all recognize, is that we're in an environment now where the reality of technology in our media lives means that the restraint of speech can actually be in the form of an outpouring of assault online from bots, from you know, a kind of online doxing and attack that happens where people are kind of shut down and attacked on social media by this sort of torrent. And that, in effect, what he's asking is, isn't that in its own way kind of a restraint of speech? And who really has the power now in terms of media platforms? The traditional legacy media is not the really truly powerful. It's the tech platforms. So it's Facebook. Facebook at one point had a journalism division. And I had colleagues in the Washington Press Corps, a couple of colleagues who went to work for Facebook. And what they were doing was essentially acting as editors. Well, then Mark Zuckerberg decided, well, we don't want that gatekeeping. He really didn't want to deal with modulating and worrying about whether content was true or not.
Didn't want to be a publisher.
He didn't want to be a publisher. I don't want to be a publisher. So you've got these platforms that actually hold most of the power about how we receive news and share news, but they have no journalistic values or training, or there's nobody there who's saying, maybe we should decide what editors do. They may drive you crazy, but the role of the editor is to say, hey, wait a minute, have you asked this question? Have you asked that question? I see you've talked to 5 people here who all think Prop Q is terrible. Have you talked to anybody who supports it? That's the role of the editor. These platforms don't have that. And that's how we're getting most of our information. So I think when you talk about the marketplace of ideas, you have to acknowledge that it isn't simply, oh, there are more newspapers around. There's a real David and Goliath thing. There's this enormous amount of power in these tech platforms. And the legacy media is trying desperately to hold its own in that world. And I think the marketplace of ideas is kind of rigged. And every country doesn't work like this. The European Union has certain restrictions and regulations of our online lives. And I would also say that there are many countries in Europe that have a partisan media infrastructure. You read The Guardian in England, you know you're coming from the left. You read The Times, you know you're coming from the right. Those people aren't trying to kill each other in the street every day.
That's true.
But so I think that part of this, a huge amount of this has to do with this kind of, this is why I say just step back from your social media feeds for the purpose of news. Get the app, pay for the subscription. People start, whenever I see a comment, paywalls, hate that paywall, I always comment back. Oh, do you work for free? Because journalists need a paycheck too. And I say it politely because I'm trying to win people over. Maybe someone will say, oh, she's right. I should think about those poor journalists who have to pay the bill.
It's true.
So the marketplace of ideas is different than it was. It's more complicated. But I also agree totally with both of you that this erosion of an understanding of what news is, and also opinion.
Yep.
Everybody's got an opinion, a dime a dozen. One of the exercises I give my classes, I used to do it for 2 weeks, and it was torture. Their students would come in and say, oh my God, don't make me do this anymore. So it's gone down to 3 days. For 3 days, I asked students to document this experience. Every time you want to issue an opinion in a conversation with someone, every time you feel yourself saying, but, I want you to stop yourself and ask a question instead. So for 3 days, I want you not
That's tough.
to issue an opinion and you can feel it. The minute you start thinking like this, but, damn it, that Jenna, I have to ask, why do you believe this?
Right.
And it's hard. It's really hard. But social media, which I love, by the way, but it has a role in my life that is not the news role in my life. It just makes you go around and around like this. But.
Yep.
So I think the whole thing about opinion, and I also had a student who dropped my class, by the way, on day 2. We were talking about confirmation bias and how we can think about why we believe what we believe. And when I got home, I made the mistake of looking at email. Why? I had worked all day, but I looked at email. And I had a long treatise from this student telling me that I had bias. Well, we all have bias, I hate to tell you. Bias is not a bad thing. It's just the lens you look through. The key is to become conscious of what your bias is. And when I got to the 3rd paragraph about why I had bias, and she had to drop my class, and she had to drop out of the university because everyone has bias, there was a long discourse quoting Joe Rogan. And I thought, oh, okay, that's why I have bias.
Yes.
Because I'm not saying whatever Joe Rogan is saying.
Both of you work for nonprofit and a rural for-profit.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how rural newspapers in America are at an all-time low. Counties across the state, multiple counties, at least 25 counties in Texas, do not have a newspaper.
And many only have one.
Right, or they consolidated underneath a larger umbrella. And as a nonprofit news agency, you're faced with lots of challenges from the funding side. I'm curious if y'all would talk about how rural America is surviving without having local information and how nonprofits are surviving in the current climate that we're in.
Surviving is a nice term.
Yep.
It's so to give context, I guess. I've worked in rural journalism now for 3 years. I just started at my job in Fredericksburg with an organization called Report for America, which is like AmeriCorps for journalism. Highly recommend. And it basically pays part of my salary to put young journalists in newsrooms to work on a specific beat. Because beat writing, for those who don't know, you're just writing about a specific thing, like crime beat, I think you've done. And,
Yep.
So that is largely gone from local newsrooms, just because there's not enough people, there's not enough money. So most of my career has been as a general assignment reporter, which is a nice way of saying we do everything. It is.
That's true.
So I have far more resources at this new paper, but at my old paper, I don't even know how to start this conversation. It's hard being the only media outlet in an area, because right now we are the only paper, we're the only media outlet. And I think you have to not take that for granted, because you have to remember that we are the only ones that are going to be reporting on this area. And a lot of counties, like you said, don't have that. And, so the Austin American Statesman is not going to talk about Gillespie County unless there's a big, crime or something big happens. They'll come down and report and then leave. We are the only people that can tell the story of this community, which is a big responsibility. And with all the issues we've seen over the past few years, it's gotten a lot more difficult. And the for-profit model, getting back to your question, makes it more difficult. I brought a stack of papers. That is what we do. We're a newspaper. But because of our for-profit model, because people are looking less towards newspapers and more towards social media or other, quote, news outlets, we have to do more with less people. So I brought a magazine. Our magazine is our revenue maker. People want visitor guides. They want magazines that are PR, which is great. We want to provide as many things as possible to our readers. But you ask how we're surviving, it's adapting. We're having to focus our attention away from print to new outlets, which is, as someone that loves print, heartbreaking. At the same time, I think I told someone earlier, you have to give the information to your readers in the way they want. Not the information they want, but in the way they want. And so I think that's kind of how we're trying to survive, is there will come a day where we stop printing, like every paper. And that's so sad. But at the same time, if it means we reach more people, it's worth it. So yeah, I think it's adapting like every media outlet.
For us, a big part of the reason public media is called public media is because public media received federal funding. Since 1967, the Public Broadcasting Act, when it was passed, allowed for some funding for stations that were going to be non-commercial stations, it started out with PBS stations, but then stations that became, NPR affiliated, also some community radio stations that are not NPR affiliated. And for us, the federal funding was about 6% of our budget, about $1 million. We have a 14.5 million budget. And we actually have two stations. We have a news station and a music station. And what the loss of that federal funding has meant is that, okay, now we're 100% community supported. So it's up to the community what they want us to do. They can either, step up and give more, or they cannot step up, and that just means we have to reduce what we're doing. And I actually find that to be a very, I think that's good motivation, with nonprofit media, the motivation is much more keenly focused on, are we doing what the community wants? Because they will vote with their money in terms of they will donate or not donate, and they will donate bigger amounts or less based on whether or not they're getting the news that they feel like serves the community. I spent, 28 years in for-profit corporate media, and I would say that the corporation's interest in what the actual community wanted was pretty small. The corporation's interest in what local businesses wanted was pretty large, because those were the advertisers.
Yeah.
We did our best not to let that flow into the newsroom, of course. The newsroom had its firewall, but it did mean that decisions that were being made about the publication writ large weren't necessarily based on what the community needs. I was editor of the Austin American-Statesman when corporate decided to to shut down our presses and move the printing of the paper to San Antonio and Houston. Did the community want that? Absolutely not. Did it serve the community in any way? Absolutely not. The only people it served was the corporation, And so being part of nonprofit, it's tough right now, because obviously we have to come up with $1 million, and not just in this one year where everybody's excited and outraged about it, but the year after and the year after. And but at least it feels like we're going to meet what the community is needing from us, or the community is going to say, hey, we don't need that much. You're giving us NPR, you're giving us some local news, and you're giving us a statewide, news magazine, and that's enough. And so I feel like that level of responsiveness is going to make us better as a media organization. It's going to make us more audience focused, and it's going to allow us to, either grow or not grow based on what Austin needs. And one of the things I love about being part of a nonprofit is every dollar that comes in stays in the community. Well, not every dollar, because we do send some fee to NPR, but it is for that product. Everything that's invested is invested in the product. And corporate, I was working at a paper that made millions and millions and millions of dollars for people in another state. And that was really frustrating.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw how much profit was just going east every year. And I just thought, man, if they'd just take half of that and invest it back in the newspaper, we could have an even better newspaper for the community.
I totally agree. Working only for-profit newspapers so far in my career, it can often feel like you're fighting against your company. When I was working for two papers on the Alabama-Georgia line, I went from reporter to editor pretty quickly, and instead of replacing my position, I'm already a reporter. You can just do that. And so I became a reporter, and then when our sports reporter left, I also became the sports reporter. And there was the same amount of hours in a day. So and so I tried my best to fill that need, but the company that's based in North Carolina is not going to understand how important Lynette High School football is. Right. I did, but they did not. And So it was the biggest argument I've ever gotten in with my publisher. And we settled on, okay, you're going to get the same amount of money and do sports. And
Yeah.
so it was often kind of, you're at odds with your company because you believe so strongly and you know the community and the company doesn't. And their job is to keep it afloat. And they have certain ideas about how to do that. I was always taught that content breeds subscribers, and that's what I try to remember.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it's difficult in a for-profit newsroom.
The good news is that there are some really good nonprofit news outlets that are based right here.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the Texas
right.
Tribune, there's the 19th.
Yeah.
One of our graduates, Mirka Moreno, is an audience engagement producer at the 19th, which is a fantastic news outlet that kind of looks at news through the lens of gender issues. So they cover a lot of stories that don't necessarily get covered in the kind of mainstream. And Andrew Weber,
Austin
who's
Current.
one of our Austin Current.
Yep.
The
Austin
Fort
Common.
Worth report is doing very well in Fort Worth. So there's a kind of revenue shift in the model. And it's still an experimental bit of world we're in about what will work and what won't work. And I think
Yeah,
there's-
even at KUT, where we're membership-based model, only 1 in 10 of our listeners, our audience members, is actually a member. So, 90% of the folks are not giving anything and they're listening all the time.
The free rider.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's okay because
Yeah.
over time they will become
Sure.
either they'll come into the right amount of money or like we got 3,000 new members this summer, and that was because they were like, I'm so angry about the federal government taking that away. You can have my tax portion and more.
right.
know?
I upped my monthly contribution. I was so mad.
Thank you.
There's an interesting transition happening in the economic ecosystem, and this is a good thing to remember that there's a range of ways to be a journalist that didn't exist when I started. And you can be a digital journalist. People with all sorts of skills around digital technology or coding, computer science, and really smart people who want to think about revenue models.
Yeah.
That's expertise that news organizations want and need as this transition keeps going. Do they have questions?
I want to ask if there's questions from y'all. I think this has been unbelievably interesting, and we could go on all day about this conversation, but we will tonight at the Alamo Draft House, and our two co-editors of the Hilltop Views are here, and they're actually going to be doing
The MCs.
Q&A tonight
Yes,
at the
awesome.
event. So
Very good.
we'll have the Texas Tribune at that event this evening. We're going to show the documentary For the Record on the Canadian Free Press, and Lori from that publication, she was planning on coming, but she couldn't come.
Oh, okay.
So last minute, and the director, she was in. I've been talking to her. So we're going to have some folks from the Tribune at the event tonight. But I want to open it up for questions now for our panelists.
Yes.
Basically, I was wondering how you guys kind of tackle the feelings, especially right now, when it comes to how big the news feels when it comes to like the federal level, everything that's going on there, and maybe like, for me and my family and all my friends, it feels so overwhelming to like not keep up with that's going on that maybe we let some of the local news kind of go by the wayside because we're so caught up and so involved and kind of like our eyes are glued
yeah.
to what's going on that feels so big that we're letting a lot of the stuff go to the wayside. How do you guys deal with it, or what do you guys have thoughts on that about like letting local news kind of fall to the side?
Wow, yeah.
One of the ways is to do what Annie was talking about in terms of localizing the national news in a big way. Her doing a story about how the immigration issues are affecting the fruit harvest. That's a great way to remind folks that this is happening here too. Another way is, frankly, one of the things that we've done is we have the news is really heavy right now. People are very anxious. We're still covering hard news, but we recently started an arts coverage desk for Austin because we feel like arts is an area that doesn't get enough coverage. When I was at the Statesman, there were more than a dozen people covering it. Now I think there are 3 covering arts and entertainment. And then also arts are something that help people. They help put life into perspective for people. And then finally, it's something that can help bridge divides. So, you can be furious and outraged about something that happened politically, but go to a Willie Nelson concert and be sharing a really special moment with somebody who is completely on the other side of the aisle from you, the political aisle, and you can relate to them and you can have conversation. And part of our mission is to help community be community in Austin. And so that is one thing we've tried to do is it helps to focus all of our anxiety and thoughts away from those things. You don't ignore it. I agree with you. It drives me crazy when people say, I love KUT, but I'm taking a news break. And I'm going, what? You don't have to listen to us, but you have to pay attention to the news.
Yeah.
So trying to remind people of what's going on here that's interesting and that has a very direct effect on their lives. And do it in different ways. Annie talked about using lots of different platforms. One of the things that we do a lot now is putting stories on Instagram that we're not trying to send people back to the website or anything. We're telling the whole story, and we're getting huge engagement on that. 100,000 people might watch, or might pay attention, engage with this story. 1 million people might watch a video that we've done, and it is, it's reminding them of the things here in Austin that they can pay attention to.
Yeah. No, I think going off of what both of y'all have said is I think it can be mutually beneficial, right? I think the news is scary and we all want to take a break sometimes, but I think focusing local can help that feeling.
Yeah, so true.
Because, like you said, like what I love about community news and what I've learned from doing it is so much is happening in your square mile that we don't realize, and that's what community news covers. Like I grew up in Atlanta. I did not know who my city council person was. I had paid no attention to it, but it affected me more than even state or federal in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so I think to pay attention to your local news helps you understand, like you said, your neighbor better. And also, I think it can help bridge divides. What I've realized about local news too is I think a lot of young journalists don't like the fluffy pieces, the fun art pieces. We all want to do investigative, hard-hitting news. But what I've realized, especially in local news, is those are just as important as the investigative pieces, because your job is to communicate what's happening in a community. And there are some good things that are happening in communities, and those are important to share with people. And we're the newspaper on record in Gillespie County. We would be doing a disservice to our readers if we didn't also cover, the local author who wrote a children's book and things like in the parades and things like that. It helps us, but it also helps others understand where they live so much better. So I think it's mutually beneficial. I think it takes a little action on the consumer side to, seek out local news. But I think in the end, maybe I'm biased, but it's good for everybody.
I think it also reminds you that you have control I think the thing with doom scrolling, which believe me, I have
I'm guilty.
gone down the rabbit hole, right? I mean, it by design, it makes you feel powerless. I think one of the reasons people disengage from the news is that feeling of powerlessness. It's terrifying. These awful things are happening. I can't do anything. And you kind of is self-reinforcing. And what reminding yourself that we are all in community does is also remind yourself about your own agency in the world. You move through the world. We each and every one of us can do something. And I think it's that loss of a feeling. There was a book about 30 years ago by a guy named Robert Putnam, an academic, called Bowling Alone. Maybe some of you have read it. And it was about the decline of these kind of clubs in the bowling league. And I know I sound corny, but I really think that's what we're talking about in some way, that the nationalization of news, which is really a phenomenon where everything has become nationalized, the school board race, that, you know, there's a design to that. And the design is to keep us feeling like we're not empowered in our own lives. But really, if you kind of put the phone and by the way, you know, I ask my students to look at news on Instagram and see how you cover different news stories in a social media setting. And I think it's very important to do, but I also think if you just kind of put it down, and I have to exercise this degree of self-control myself and go out and just pick up the local paper or listen to KUT has this thing now, Marnie Castor. Marnie Castor does this serenity moment in the news, on KUT. So I'll be driving home, it'll be like 5 o'clock, it's a crazy day, I'm listening to the news, and then Marnie Castor comes on, and literally what she's doing for a minute is getting you to deep breathe. So I'll be in the car, and she's like, today we're going to learn to do meditative breathing, like right in the middle of KUT. And I'm like, when I first heard this, I thought, oh my God, what a gimmick. And now I
imagine how I reacted. When they came to me, I was like, what?
On a newscast?
But you know what?
That's good.
It is awesome. It's like, oh my God. It's, she'll say you're at
Take
the
a
red
moment.
light. Breathe in, take a moment. The news is stressful. Yes, it is, Marnie Castor. Thank you. I think that's one of the greatest things KUT is doing.
It reminds me of Garrison Keillor's Writer's Almanac.
Yes.
When in the morning he would come on for a couple of minutes and just give you kind of a little poem or a reading and give you a pause.
Yeah.
It's a place that you can pause but not feel overwhelmed and kind of have it intentionally designed in the moment. And I think that's a really important thing.
And I think local journalism too, we almost have the opposite goal. Our goal, what we do is for our little pocket of the world. National news is for everybody. Our coverage is to make y'all feel like you can go to a commission meeting and speak about what you believe in. Our goal is to spur knowledge. We want to inform our community so they can act. And I think local journalism, it's for y'all. We make it just for you guys.
I have this is from the Austin Common.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's from the Austin Common. For Amy Stansberry does this, and she has a really good graphics designer. But I have these kind of explain what Prop Q does, what that means, what the tax rate looks like, all that's going on today. And I've got copies up here if y'all want them. I got extra copies, and Amy's always bringing stuff over. But
Actually, and if you want to listen to the best story I've heard about Prop Q, it was on KUT by St. Edward's alumnus, Andrew Weber, who did a breakdown of how much you actually would pay in additional tax, because there's a big disinformation campaign going on around this. And he did the math. And I was like, I went home and I said to my husband, it's not 20%. It'll cost us $300 a year. And it was all big. He's like, how'd you find that out? I said, Andrew Weber told me on the way home from work.
So last thing, is Prop Q going to pass? Yes or no?
No.
No,
Not going to pass. Not
No.
going to pass?
no, I voted for it, but no.
I don't
gonna
vote
be
here.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm not
Two
sure.
thirds.
I got donuts on it in
Yeah.
my class.
Yeah.
So, thank you all
Thank
very
you.
much
Thank
for
you.
this.
This
This
was
was
fun.
awesome.
Thank you.
We've got a little small gift.